So we're going to start with a brief welcome and share some information about where we're coming in from. We'll do a brief introduction of Team Up Washington. So welcome, you're all part of the team. Then we'll spend some time. We have a great opportunity to share with Brian and Jesse from Futures Without Violence the history of the curricula that we're using for Team Up and the national landscape. Then we'll go right into the curricula, the Coaching Boys into Men and Athletes as Leaders, both with experts from Washington State. So Ward and Rebecca will be great resources for us with that. Then we'll share some stories from the field. We've got Carlos joining us, who's a coach, and Elise, who's an athlete, joining us as well later on. And we'll have time for Q&A, and then we'll do some closing. So I just wanted to acknowledge the land that we're on. We at Wiskative and at Team Up acknowledge that we gather on Indigenous land. In my case, it's the traditional territory of Coast Salish peoples, and I'm on Nisqually land here in Olympia. And the people are still here, and they're continuing to do incredible work, and we want to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. So I invite you to find out whose land you're on. So as we move forward, let's honor those folks. So just want to acknowledge that, we're coming to you from our living rooms, from wherever your laptop is, in a time where there's a lot going on. So I just really appreciate you taking the moments to be with us and to focus on something outside of yourself that brings us all closer together, and it's just a really important time for us to do that. So thank you so much for being here today. So I wanted to just spend a moment welcoming you officially, and we have some great friends that are professional athletes who wanted to get in on the fun as well. So I'm going to share a couple of videos from them before we get started. So, okay, this one is from Dan Wilson.
Hello, my name is Dan Wilson, former catcher for the Seattle Mariners. And I just want to say thank you. With all the efforts of the Seattle Mariners and the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence will go a long way in continuing to create communities with healthy, respectful relationships.
Okay, and then this is Michelle Betos, who was with us last fall, actually, at the Seahawks Stadium, but she's here with us in spirit.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Betos from OL Reign. I just wanted to thank you for coming out tonight and teaming up with us against domestic violence. Together, we can make a difference.
Love it. And then lastly, Kyle Seeger from the Seattle Mariners.
Hey guys, this is Kyle Seeger with the Seattle Mariners. I just wanted to thank you guys for coming out here today, showing your support, and to help us prevent domestic violence. Together, we can make a difference.
But it's also just really important to know that even when we're not in person, we have all of this support coming to us from all across the country. So I just wanted to before we get really officially started, I wanted to introduce our panelists and spend a little time getting to know them, and then we'll dive in. So like I said, I'm Eileen. I coordinate our prevention work at the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, which is a nonprofit network of over 70 domestic and sexual violence programs across Washington State. And part of our work is coordinating Team Up. So I'm so excited to be able to host this webinar and share these great folks with you. So I'll just go down the list. This is actually in order of how folks are speaking. So I'll introduce Brian O'Connor, if you want to say hi.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Brian O'Connor. I am with Futures Without Violence. I actually am the co-creator of Coaching Boys into Men that we're going to be speaking about today, as well as a prime collaborator with my friends in Washington, with whom we've worked for a long, long time on Athletes as Leaders. I'm with Futures Without Violence specifically. I've been at the agency for 15 years, and prior to that, actually my background is in advertising and journalism. And so we're going to talk more about the program a little later, and I look forward to our time together.
Great, thanks so much for being here. And Jesse, how about you?
Hi everyone, my name is Jesse Mahler. I'm also with Futures Without Violence. I helped run a lot of our programs around Coaching Boys into Men, and the work that's happening nationally, new program developments, and help supporting folks get off the ground when they're just starting up. So it's great to meet everyone. Excited to share this information with you.
Great. And it's such a great treat. Brian actually did join us last summer in Seattle, but this makes it a little bit easier for you both to be here. So thanks so much for being with us. How about Ward? You want to say hello, Ward?
I'm Ward Ryan. I'm the social change manager at LifeWire, and I do prevention work on the east side of King County. And I've been doing Coaching Boys into Men in the area since about the mid-2000s.
Great. Thanks. And I've loved working with Ward all that time. So it's really fun to have a new thing to work on together. And Rebecca, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Milliman. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I am the Prevention and Education Coordinator at the Harborview Abuse and Trauma Center in Seattle, Washington. I've been implementing Coaching Boys into Men for about 5 years, and I'm also the co-creator of Athletes as Leaders, and we'll be talking about that more tonight. Thanks for being here, and thanks for having me.
Great. And Carlos has joined us already. So Carlos, why don't you introduce yourself as well? Thanks.
Hi all, Carlos Enriquez. I'm boys soccer, the pleasure of implementing the program for many seasons now, and have joined the group and doing some of the trainings, and it's been a great experience, and super happy to be on board and to be here today.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, good, and Elise will join us a little bit later as well. So what a great team. I really appreciate all of you doing this with us. I wish we were together in person, but this is good too. I get to see your faces. They're just a little bit smaller than in real life. So I just want to do a little bit of introducing to Team Up, and the best way I think to do that is to share another video. So I'm going to start with the video, and then I'll do a little bit of framing, and then I'll pass it on to Jesse and Brian. So we're going to show this video, which is on our Team Up Washington webpage.
Team Up Washington uses sports as a platform to end sexual assault and dating abuse. Our initiative expands the reach of Coaching Boys into Men and Athletes as Leaders, 2 violence prevention programs for high school athletes. Since 2019, we've brought coaches, athletic directors, advocates, and mentors together for trainings on how to implement these programs to create change in our schools, communities, and in our homes. Our goal is to support communities to take on violence prevention across Washington state by leveraging the power of sports. Here's how.
1.5 million high school students experience physical abuse at the hands of someone they're dating nationally every year. We know that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will experience sexual assault before they turn 18. You know, the good news is that sexual assault and domestic violence and teen dating abuse, these are things that are 100% preventable. We can totally end this. And the way we're going to get there, you know, the path towards that prevention is right here. It's with all of you in this room, and we can do that together. And it gives me so much hope and joy for our future.
All genders, all kids, all athletes, all students play a role in preventing violence and creating a safer community for everyone.
All of us who have had a coach that's inspired us know the power of that coach. The power that they have. The amount of time we spend around the coaches is just so much that when they are teaching us those character lessons as well, it can make a big difference in all of our lives.
The lessons they learn about dignity, self-respect, grace, how they carry themselves, are how they're going to take themselves into the world. And so we're not teaching them to be athletes, we're teaching them to be human beings.
We make a difference, and what I say and challenge each of you to do is to make that difference something that's powerful for our young people.
I think when athletes are coached with the expectations that they will positively innovate their own lives and their own communities, they will rise to these expectations.
Athletes have so much power, so much clout, so much influence over their classmates. Let's use every ounce of that we can to make a positive difference.
When we show athletes through example that they have the ability to change the world, they will.
Hundreds of coaches across Washington state have been trained and are implementing this in their community. Coaches and teams are having conversations about relationships and community standards across our state, and we are all the better for it. Join the team. Visit teamupwa.org and be a part of the movement for a better future.
I just love that video. Every time Rosalie Fish says that line at the end, I get all choked up. So there's no way I could say anything better than that to introduce you. But I do just want to acknowledge that, like, living in this time of pandemic and revolution and suffering, it's really made me realize in a new way the critical role that sports and connection play in our lives. sort of in new ways. And Team Up is a gift for me that just continues to give. And I've been thinking a lot about, especially when they're not around, what sports provide for us during this time without, I'm really craving that. And, I've been an athlete my whole life. I played in high school and through college, and still playing, rec sports, certainly. And, I could tell you a lot about what it's meant to me, but I feel like that's actually not what I need to tell you. I don't need to tell you, of all people, the folks that are, in this room or container tonight, the power of sports, you all know. So what I think the most important thing to focus on is the connection that sports bring to all of us. And during these challenging times for me, it's been really helpful to know that the antidote to suffering is almost always connection. And that the connection that Team Up and that doing these programs provides is the thing that actually makes things better. So for me, I've found throughout my life, and certainly I think through these really challenging times now, is like whatever the question is, connection is almost always the answer of how to make it better. So what I hope for tonight, that what you get out of this is a way forward to think about how do you stay connected or get more connected or start connections in your community to support communities to create, grow, sustain, and lift up healthy relationships. So with our statewide focus of Team Up, we have this really cool opportunity to do this in new ways. And then also the added benefit of having all genders included. So not just coaching boys into men or athletes as leaders, but both. That Team Up approach of having all genders represented across our entire state of Washington, supported by national efforts and supported by all the communities around the world, really, that are doing this, is just, I think, an opportunity that's too good to pass up. So I love the idea of Team Up being the thing that leverages the power of sports. And I'm just so happy that you all are a part of it. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Brian and Jesse, who again have just graciously agreed to share their insights from the national focus. And just Brian, I just think it's so great that you've started this, and look where we're at. So off to you. Thanks.
Hi, Eileen. Thanks so much, and hi everybody. I couldn't have said it better as an introduction to what we're going to talk about when you said connection, because in fact, Eileen, we were preparing for our conversation with you all today. We were preparing yesterday, and I didn't know about that little preamble you were going to provide there, Eileen, because connectedness is so important, and now more than ever, if we hear that even one more time, right? But what we also want to know and hear from you as we do enter into these uncertain times, it's around the virtual engagement piece. What is the season going to look like, right? And we don't really know. And so in staying connected and also ensuring a consistent routine is something that we know is a really, really healthy need, particularly for young people and for all of us, right? So the schedule of daily or weekly practices is so incredibly important. And in fact, it's really a very trauma-informed approach that one can take around how we ensure that there's predictability in being a caring and consistent adult in the life of young people. We know that it's a core protective factor on helping young people thrive and succeed. And so really at the heart of the program and of this conversation that we're talking about is a guide in being that caring and consistent adult, in trying to ensure that we're fortifying a safe and supportive and stable and nurturing relationship with young people, and being explicit, right? The best defense is an even better offense, as we know. And so being explicit about that, handling teachable moments and being reactive to situations when they happen is incredibly important. And we actually talk about that in the programs as well. But being really explicit and intentional about this work and getting out in front of it around what do healthy relationships actually look like and feel like and sound like and taste like is really, really important. And that's what we're trying to talk about today, and to draw a parallel between team connectedness and peak performance on the field really requires that we care about and focus in on the health and safety and wellness of our athletes off the field as well. We know that teams win connected, and frankly, they lose when they're not. Mm-hmm. And so with that, So with that, I know that there's a number of us on the phone, and so I learn every time that we have these conversations. So and considering there's a large number of us and we're on Zoom, it's not necessarily an organic conversation, but please don't hesitate to put in the chat box any comments or questions. I did help co-create this program. Particularly, I'm going to talk about coaching boys into men, but you're not going to hurt my feelings, right? If there's something that doesn't fit well with you, or especially as we're talking about what online engagement or needing to social distance as we're looking to start the season, how we need to modify and adapt is going to be really important. So we learn every single time we have conversations with you. I was so privileged, and it was an awesome experience to be at the Seahawks Stadium last year. What was particularly cool the next day was, which many of you probably have done, we went to the practice facility, and that was really, really cool outside of town. I'd never really done that. And so in thinking about, the history and the national landscape, I'm going to go pretty quickly through Coaching Boys into Men, specifically some of the history, because it's relatively easy and straightforward to explain. It's not necessarily easy to implement. We know this stuff can be hard, and that's why we're also here to support you, to have this serve as a pretty extensive introduction to the program, and then when we get into working together on how best we can implement this as well across the state. And so there's already a lot from which to build on the work that Rebecca and Eileen and Ward have done with Team Up and the implementations, and Carlos as well, in the implementation that's already been had. So you want to hear from the coaches of what exactly, how has it gone? And so we'll get to that in just a bit. We can go to the next slide, please. So Coaching Boys into Men is the only evidence-based program that trains and motivates athletic coaches to teach their young male athletes healthy relationship skills and positive masculinity. We say evidence-based programs, I'm going to get a little bit into some of the research that is behind Coaching Boys into Men, and how it's one of the only programs that's been endorsed by the CDC to decrease actual abuse perpetration. But really, Coaching Boys into Men is a leadership program. As Eileen talked about, it's really about leveraging the leadership and the social capital that many athletes have, the influence that we know they have amongst their peers. And so that's really how we talk about Coaching Boys into Men. And the evidence really also highlights how it's about positive bystandership, right? And so when you see or hear something that's not okay in the locker room or on Zoom or in the hallway or in the classroom, you now have the tools and the resources and the language to actually speak up and say something about it. We can go to the next slide, please. The history of CBIM is that coaching in Coaching Boys into Men was a metaphor. So we never intended to have the program be one focused in on engaging and motivating athletic coaches at the beginning, at the outset. It really was about coaching as a metaphor in engaging and working with men from all walks of life to talk with young people about the importance of healthy relationship skills. And there's a lot of polling and data that went into it from the late 90s into the early 2000s about asking men particularly what they would do to get involved, to help be part of the solution on ending domestic violence, on ending violence against women and girls particularly. We often say the term, let's not indict, but let's invite, because up till that time, when we had talked about domestic violence, the role that men saw themselves in those specific situations were what? Pretty much two different character roles, so to speak, as the perpetrator or even at best the inactive bystander. And so that gets to what I was saying before around how are we being explicit and intentional about inviting men into this being part of the solution. Because what the polling also showed was that people really know and felt that it is a serious issue, and it's a social issue, and something that I didn't necessarily know how to get involved. Nobody had been asking me to get involved and letting me know what I can do about it. Go to the next slide, please.
That's so true. I just so appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
Thanks. And so this is just more of what I was also talking about around what we launched was a broad public awareness campaign. Again, coaching as a metaphor. It really was it's amidst a portfolio of work that we do around intentionally engaging men into what has historically been a women's issue, right? But we're not going to be able to solve it if we're only talking to half the population. The next video is going to be an introduction into Coaching Boys into Men, and it's going to be able to explain the story, or it's going to be explained. It's going to be able to explain it better than I can. And it's a story of Joelle, who is out of Pittsburgh. And please know that, just be aware that the video does have explicit mention to domestic, physical, and emotional violence. And let's roll it. We'll talk a little bit about it afterwards, if anybody's having technical difficulty.
There you go. Pick him up. Pick him up.
I play football for my mom. You play football for Woodland Hills, so you get a lot of respect.
Nice feet. Nice feet. Good. Good job. That's going to work. Pick him up. Pick him up. Good job.
It's hard to please my coaches, but my mom, she's on another level.
Joelle might be right by saying I'm tougher than any coach he's ever had. Joelle, 6 o'clock, get up. Get up, Joelle.
My family would be my mom, older sister, younger sister. I have an older brother live with me, and his wife and his kid.
Oh, you only got one hit. It's been so long.
Oh, it's been so long.
When Joelle and I are hanging out, we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of laughter. I'm always wiping tears from, crying, laughing. We're all trying to do things, and we all support each other because we're all we have. Joelle has wisdom, maybe because of certain things that he's gone through. He's had a little rough life. During the marriage that I was in, it was very abusive.
My father, he used to abuse my mom, and hit on my mom a lot.
My kids have woke up in the middle of the night screaming and hollering because they hear or see that their mom is getting choked or pounded. I was pregnant once, and he beat the mess out of me. Lost a baby. The last time I tried to get away, we had everything packed. He wound up coming home, and he grabbed a African spear, and he just started stabbing me.
That day that happened, it wasn't a very good day for me. Seeing my mom crying and just struggling to live.
And I couldn't save him from knowing that your mom was getting ready to get beat up again and blah, blah, blah.
It's like numbness because you're shocked. And it's even more confusing because it's your father. When you're growing up in something like that, in an environment like that, you feel like that's how it's supposed to be.
You can learn and know that there are other routes to take.
So it's all about teaching you guys how to control yourselves in every environment, not just on the field, but off the field as well.
A lot of our kids come from broken homes where they see violence. It's no wonder why these guys are growing up and kind of following those footsteps. Coaching Boys into Men is a program that we started here with our athletes.
You're a better man. You know how to treat women.
It's helping us break patterns with these young men in their relationships with the women that are in their lives. Abuse can come in many different ways, right? It can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be what you say on the internet.
Boys and Men taught me how to control my anger.
Like, my dad was never really around, so
no means no. Like, just stop doing what you're trying to do to her.
If you're not going to disrespect your mom, why would you disrespect, like, another female?
I try to explain to them that it's not their fault that their mother was abused. It's not their fault that their sister was abused. But it will be their fault if they continue the process.
I have to be part of my solution, so the men have to be part of the solution.
it's teaching me to be a mentor to others.
This is not a black issue, it's not a poor issue, it's not a woman's issue, or it's not a girl's issue. This is every one of our issues.
In 10 years, I feel like I'm gonna be a good person, or at least know that I'm a better person than my dad was.
Take a breath. After that, I was saying it always chokes me up. It's incredibly powerful, even though I've seen it many, many times. So just so we know, just FYI, Joel Shaw, who is featured in the video, is at Kent State University in Ohio. He's a running back there. Just want to let you know that he's doing well. So with Coaching Boys and Men, I'm going to say I have just two more things to say before I hand over to my partner in peace here, Jesse. So the program, as I know that modifications during the times of COVID and adaptations will be necessary, and historically the way the program works is it's across the sports season, the 12-week sports season. There's 12 specific topics, if you will. There's a different topic each week that the coach then introduces to the team and facilitates a conversation about it, ranging from what would be considered kind of easier topics to broach at the beginning of the season, like personal responsibility or talking about insulting language, moving into digital disrespect, into more difficult situations or conversations to have around understanding consent, bragging about sexual reputation. And then it kind of rounds out towards the end of the season around modeling, right? And how then you're going to go forth and understand that it's more than just one conversation you're having per week, right? There are many times that the coach isn't there. What does it look like on a Friday night when you're at the party? What does it look like on a Saturday afternoon when you're heading out with some friends, right? And so if we go to the next slide, and what you saw there too on that previous slide is the specific coach's kit. So those would be the materials, right? That go that are your pocket-sized guide or manual, if you will, that kind of go through each of the conversations to be had. And I'm sure Carlos can speak a bit more too about his experience of actually being a coach and delivering that. As far as then the evaluation was the last thing I wanted to say before I hand it to Jesse, is around, just around the randomized controlled trial. So I mentioned about abuse perpetration, right? We have our researchers out of the University of Pittsburgh, which actually helps facilitate us and helps organize us to have that video. But there's three main outcomes that are really important for us also to think about, besides obviously trying to just really reduce perpetration itself, is really important. It's like increasing knowledge of abusive behaviors is what the program endeavors to do, right? We have to recognize it and see it in order to be able to do something about it, as well as then also increasing gender equitable attitudes, right? And so that's pretty straightforward there as well. And I know when we talk about the intersection with athletes as leaders, Rebecca will certainly be able to talk about that too when it comes to gender equity and the root of that program and how these can dovetail and work together. And then finally, the final outcome within the research that we'll see where we were able to move the needle around statistically significant positive results on increasing the intention to intervene. How do we increase positive bystander behavior? And that's what I was talking about before. When you see or hear something, speaking up. And the core action to speak up is to talk to your coach, because the coach has been explicit and intentional about saying, these are the things I care about. This is the program I'm looking to run on my team. And now we as a collective are going to go forth and be better. Thanks a lot for your time. Jesse, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So, where is CBIM now? We kind of just shared a bit about the history, and I think what's relevant to share is that Coaching Boys into Men is larger than it has ever been before. We're in communities across the United States, very well established places like Washington and Seattle and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But honestly, new communities are reaching out almost every single week with, we're implementing in Holland, Michigan, we're implementing in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and New Orleans, Louisiana. and we've been recently implementing in a few new African countries, for instance, Zambia, and we've done some work in Ecuador, all of which is to say that everyone here is a part of this much larger movement. This movement to leverage sports, to understand and use sports differently, to move away from hyper competition, to move away from any negative message that could be received, to ones that really promote healthy relationships, to create the kind of caring and consistent environments that Brian mentioned, and to really understand the value of healthy relationships and intervening when witnessing abuse. So we appreciate everyone being here, and this is only going to grow. You can go to the next slide. And just to emphasize one thing that Brian said is that in this current context of coronavirus, that we know that sexual and domestic violence, they don't end just because schools may not be in session or because sports may not be happening in public. And so this is why the program is still critical. There is a need for the connection between coaches and athletes. And more than ever, we think about Me Too as a movement, then there's a need for boys and men to take more leadership, not just in promoting healthy relationships, but I saw someone in the chat mention, the importance of not being complicit when witnessing violence, when witnessing homophobic comments, when witnessing catcalling. Those are the types of things that we want to empower boys and men to be able to take a stand on. Even though COVID has impacted sports so much, and I know generally speaking, the situation in Washington, it depends upon what county you're in and school. I mean, there's so many things up in the air. We still have coaches who are implementing virtually. That was this spring, this summer. We have many who are lined up for this fall. It can provide a sense of purpose for athletes even. If you're a senior in high school, you want your senior year to mean something, if you're on the soccer team or you're on the football team. So to have that sense of togetherness, and as I was mentioning, the value of the relationship education is still so critical. So we're learning new ways to implement the program virtually. We're learning what virtual sessions can look like. We're learning there might be new pockets in the school day to implement some of this curriculum. There might be new after-school programs that are popping up. Those are ways that we're thinking about adapting CBIM. In the next slide. The last thing that I'll share before passing it off to Ward to talk more about some of the nuts and bolts of what this program really looks like and putting it in the hands of coaches is that we're constantly developing new content. So in this present moment, a lot of that new content is going to be about virtual implementation of coaching boys into men and athletes as leaders. And so we're creating, PowerPoints that are for advocates to train coaches that are virtual specific. We're creating best practices for if you're having a session over something like Zoom, what does that look like? And something that's really exciting is that starting in September, there are going to be monthly trainings for advocates and eventually for coaches on topics like virtual CBIM, adaptations of CBIM to meet your unique needs, a program evaluation, and many more topics. And if you register on our website to get updates, which we'll talk more about at the end of this session, you'll be up to date with everything that you need to get going, and you'll be linked to a much larger national and international community of folks who are invested in the same things as you. So once again, thank you so much. This is so important. I'll pass it off to Ward to talk really about what this has looked like in Washington State.
Awesome, thank you, Jeff. So we have been doing Coaching Boys into Men in this state since the mid-2000s, as I said before, but we really have been bringing it to a new level through Team Up Washington over the last couple of years. And we are just so excited to be able to have this extend to the corners of the state and hopefully beyond there as well. I wanted to just say it's been fantastic to be working with Futures Without Violence, who have supported us tremendously in this process and really have put into action what we have been suggesting is new adaptations and new content that they are actively working on presently, and it's very exciting to see what's going to come. So stay tuned. You can expect new content and new material forthcoming, and I think you can all be looking forward to the fact that we're going to be well supported throughout the future to be implementing evidence-based, strong curriculum that will definitely transform teams and transform communities. And just to kind of kick off what the process has been like here, Rebecca implemented a program at Garfield High School that has used Coaching Boys into Men and athletes as leaders, and really had transformative impact on that community. And so we're going to see how that played out.
I got set. Yo.
As a young man playing a sport, you are supposed to be aggressive, strong, unemotional.
We kind of have the sense that you have to intimidate the opponent.
We pretend a lot. Young men don't feel any pain. Young men don't cry.
I don't think anyone at this age has that level of self-esteem. So especially when you're in something like football, you're even more vulnerable. I think that that's why people lash out.
So I'm gonna ask you guys a series of questions and we'll have a conversation about it. So what are some of the examples of disrespect behavior towards women and girls?
Sometimes you don't realize how harmful your words can be. Sometimes you might realize that and you still use harmful language anyways.
Consent, when you guys hear that word consent, what do you think about? What does that mean?
We know that sexual assault is a problem in our society, not just in schools and not just with young people. 1 in 4 women are assaulted or experience intimate partner violence. And we know that in order to prevent those issues, we want to reach people young. We want to reach them when they're still learning about romantic relationships.
We're going to talk about discussing and respecting personal boundaries.
So Coaching Boys into Men is an evidence-based violence prevention program that is geared towards male athletes, specifically delivered by coaches.
Today, there's a couple things we got to talk about.
All they have to do is have these 15-minute conversations for 12 sessions throughout their season, and they might be preventing a future incident. Or they might be inspiring a young person that will then talk to their peers and ultimately prevent it in a community, even if it is not just coming from their team.
My original goal when I started this project at this high school was to implement Coaching Boys into Men with just one team. It was basically on a voluntary basis, and they really saw the value in the program for their team. After that first year, the principal saw the success. I came back to him with the data because we are evaluating the program.
It couldn't just be one group of kids getting that information. Everybody needed to have it because it was information that a lot of our students don't get.
So now in year 2, we are actually implementing this with every boys team at Garfield.
Let's go.
I've had some success playing college football and playing in the NFL, but I really felt like this is what I was called to do, was to mentor young men.
If you're walking with your mom to the grocery store, you don't want nobody yelling, "Hey, baby, what's good?" You would feel a certain type of way, right? Like, man, I know he ain't talking to my mom like that, right?
The Boys to Men program gives you a starting point, you know, to have some of these conversations that you typically wouldn't have.
It is something that's primary. I make it primary because these young men need to know how to communicate in the world of today.
I would much rather do this now and have these conversations now versus having something terrible happen. I mean, it's not pleasant to think about, but to have this conversation reactively is, I don't think, the right approach. As we go along through the program, I see kids opening up more. I see them talking about the ideas of respect and language and how words have meaning in more educated ways.
Thank you. Conversation is the key.
There was things in there that I noticed that I've done in the past, and like with Boys to Men, I just realized, that should change. So I started to buy into what Coach was telling us.
Led to a lot of really good discussions, a lot of really honest discussions about our lives, our relationships, how we're dealing with stress in school.
It just meant just things that help you grow more as a young adult. It just helps you understand more things about life.
I think what this program taught us is that a good athlete, a sportsman, is somebody who doesn't have to intimidate.
Someone will say, oh, that's so gay, or they'll liken someone to taking a hit like a girl. That's the sort of thing that we're calling each other on. That's not very Boys to Men. We reference the program, we reference the fact that that's not okay.
Athletes have a lot of social capital. They're the leaders in their community, and other students, they really look up to them. And if they represent respect, nonviolence, and integrity, it then can spread like wildfire in a school.
So I would say to any principal, this is really worth its weight in gold for you to go ahead and invest time and energy into this process, because it really will have an impact on the culture in your building.
You're creating the building blocks to empowering our young men.
That duty falls on us to actually go out and prove to people that we can be in healthy relationships.
You all ready? Yeah!
I think that's happening.
So Coaching Boys into Men is an evidence-based curriculum that covers the span of the sports season in 12 mini training sessions. We know from both anecdotal and specific research that it builds trust and sets expectations for acceptable behavior, defines abusive behaviors, and teaches healthy relationship skills. And most importantly, I think this is the key piece to this, is that you all know the impact that you can have on your players and what kind of influence that impact on players ripples out through the entire school community, and in fact the entire community. We see what happens when that coach's influence is either positive or negative, right? And there's every season, every sports season, every year, we have examples of stories of each. And what Coaching Boys into Men is a tool for you to use to actually leverage your influence in a positive way with really practical, very easily accessible lessons that can put words in your mouth that you may reflect what you already believe, but which you don't have words for, that can actually leverage that belief system into positive attitudes and behaviors in your team. And using those athletes that are leaders in your school, leveraging that leadership for positive benefit and good. And we see this not only in the team, but once those athletes begin to demonstrate that leadership, that positive bystander behavior, the stuff of acting, not cheering on, but acting to intervene, acting to influence those behaviors in a positive way, begins to ripple out through the entire school community and the community at large. So the on-field training added to off-field leadership, which athletes are leaders and will be leaders in the future as well, are just so critical. But this cannot happen without the positive influence of coaches and coaches demonstrating not only the curriculum and teaching the curriculum, but actually demonstrating the behaviors that you expect to bring through and to demonstrate. It starts with you. So it really is critical for us to look at the fact that your commitment, the commitment that coaches make to influencing your athletics youth, is just so critical. And as we know, coaches consistently rank over time as the #1 positive influence on today's youth. And I could say that having worked with men who cause harm in their intimate relationships for a number of years, that when we look at those men that actually grew up with men that did cause harm, if you look at the men that didn't go on to create abusive relationships, the one thing that stood out in the reason why the #1 protective factor was a strong male influence that demonstrated positive behavior and positive attitudes to those youth. So it's just huge, the influence that you have, and the kind of influence that you're having one way or the other. And so if you can use this as a tool to have positive impact on those youth, you could literally be transforming generations of youth for times to come. And we know that one of the most impactful relationships that, as we saw in the Joelle video, is that the relationship of an abusive father to their son can actually be an intergenerational transmission of this malady. And so it's just so critical for us to have positive coaches teaching and demonstrating positive behaviors to their young athletes. As I mentioned, Coaching Boys into Men is an evidence-based program. This has been evaluated in gold standard research and has been demonstrated to increase both the knowledge of abusive behaviors, which is critical, especially for young men and boys to be able to know what is actually abusive behavior, and that it increases the likelihood that they will actually intervene in that abusive or disrespectful behavior by their peers. And this is what we see is changing culture within a school, is that when those leaders with that strong social capital begin to speak up in a way that their peers take notice of, you begin to shift the cultural norms in dramatic fashion, and it can happen very quickly. And so we know, we have the evidence to know, to suggest that coaching boys into men can shift and change cultures. And we have the experience of talking with thousands of coaches where we've seen this happen. And as I said before, and I can't emphasize this enough, your actions and your behaviors affect your players and ultimately ripple out through the entire community. So it starts with your players, individuals that you're working with, obviously with that team, ripples out to the schools and to the community of beyond. And obviously in this day where athletes are moving on to colleges and then into other communities, you can actually change the world quite literally by having an impact with those individual players. Coaching commitments, as I mentioned before, are really critical because we know, and you know, obviously from having done several different seasons, that if you're failing to plan, then you're planning to fail. And so this is really a real critical component of what we bring is support to you in how you can implement it, and we'll help you plan the implementation of the curriculum over the course of your season. But ultimately, it really comes down to you being as clear and particular as you possibly can be in planning out how you're going to prepare that season, what days you're going to use to implement the curriculum, which coaches you're going to have speak to it, and then also identifying athletic leaders who are natural leaders with this subject matter that can add their voice and their credibility to your lesson plans over the course of that season. The card series, which is the heart and soul of the program, are designed to be delivered in 15 to 20 minute messages over the course of a season. So once a week, the sessions would go for 12 sessions. And they're really basically just a framework, a scaffolding for you to be able to present this information. You can read it, you could literally just read right from the card series, but best when you integrate the information and put it into your own words and then demonstrate it to your team, both in your actions, in your commitment, and then also in your behavior. As you can see, the card series is divided up into prep cards, and then the training cards that are the weekly discussions. And then there are timeout cards that allow for you to make coaching boys into men applicable for your team and for your community. And then halftime cards where you begin to foster partnerships in your school and in your community. For instance, hosting a fan pledge day, connecting with your local radio station, getting the news out to your community about the stand that you're taking in your community. And then the teachable moments cards are cards that can help you take advantage of oops moments or situations that come up during the course of a season that allow you to take advantage of that. And instead of ignoring it or sweeping it under the rug, actually take that and see that as an opportunity to look at those teachable moments as an opportunity to demonstrate to the entire team, hey, we're human, we all make mistakes, we need to get back on track, we are going to hold each other accountable, and we're going to actually stick with each other through the learning opportunity and get to the other side. And then the resource cards, obviously those go without saying. We also have resources that are available on our website for you to use that are specific to each community across the state. The training topics of the training cards are, as I mentioned before, preseason speech, personal responsibility, and you'll notice a theme here that these are developmental. In other words, they start out at kind of low-hanging fruit and then begin and build on each week. So this is why we really recommend that coaches don't just skip around and pick topics, but actually follow the curriculum as it is designed, because this is the evidence that the evidence shows that this developmental model is particularly impactful for teams. So personal responsibility, developing to insulting language, disrespectful behavior towards women and girls, digital disrespect, understanding consent, breaking about sexual orientation, when aggression crosses the line, no excuse for relationship abuse, communicating boundaries, modeling respect, and promoting equality, and then ultimately culminating in signing the Coaching Boys into Men Pledge. As I mentioned before, it's really critical that you get support, and we are encouraged to see a number of advocates on the webinar here, and know that there are advocates throughout the state that are anxious to support you in implementation. And if you're not getting support in your local community, reach out to us and we'll see that you get support. The preseason, it's important that this is not a training. It's important for you to know that this is an overview, and we have delayed the actual coaches training for closer to the season. And so important for you to attend that training when we re-announce it. Identify a day and time that works for your weekly Coaching Boys into Men lessons or Athletes as Leaders lessons. Preseason survey for athletes, and this is something that we really would encourage you to track and use data to track the impact that you're having on your team. And we can assist you with that. The Coaching Boys into Men or the coachescorner.org website has those surveys, and all the materials that you need to implement Coaching Boys into Men is available on that amazing website. And then during the season, obviously, you're going to be facilitating the trainings and communicating with your coaching staff and with your advocates that are supporting you, and then addressing teachable moments, as well as addressing concerns that come up. And then postseason surveys, again, to do the pre and post evaluation of the impact that you're having, really critical that we do that. And then to be able to wrap up with your advocate or the Coaching Boys into Men staff that you're working with, just to see what worked, what didn't, how can we improve this for next time, and then what would be perhaps ways to augment the training that you want to see happen over the course of the following season. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my fabulous colleague, Rebecca Milliman, who created Athletes as Leaders, co-created Athletes as Leaders, and has done tremendous community transformative work in the Seattle area for a number of years now.
Thank you so much, Ward. Hello again, everyone. My name is Rebecca Milliman, and I'm going to be presenting tonight an overview of the program Athletes as Leaders. And I just wanted to give a little bit of history. You saw the video of Coaching Boys into Men, and that kind of filmed at Garfield, and that kind of gives the context for how this program began. So you can see how that principal, Ted Howard, was so supportive of implementing Coaching Boys into Men. This was the school, or this is a school where athletes have a lot of social influence, and he definitely saw the power of Coaching Boys into Men to, help to change the school, not just athletes' behaviors and team dynamic, but also school culture. So my immediate thought was, especially when we decided to do it with every team, what about the girls' teams, right? We should obviously have a focus on engaging men and boys. We know from the research that they are most likely to cause harm when it comes to sexual assault and dating violence. But young women should be central to the conversation. They understand these issues very deeply, partly due to a lot of them having their own personal experiences, and their voices should be uplifted. Furthermore, the way that we market Coaching Boys into Men is a leadership opportunity, right? We don't really call it a sexual assault and dating violence prevention program, because that's not super exciting for a lot of young people to jump on board with that. So we call it a leadership program or a leadership opportunity. And when you're marketing it in that way, it actually, ironically, can become a Title IX issue when you're not offering equal opportunities to all genders. And so I didn't want there to be any issues with Title IX or with gender equity. So that was another idea of why it's important to do a program like this with everyone. So we launched it, I recreated it. I created it along with some colleagues and along actually with a lot of input from the coaches and athletes at Garfield. And since then it has launched nationally, and it is available free online at athletesasleaders.org. So what is Athletes as Leaders? This program is all about developing student athletes as leaders. It's a program that encourages them to create a safe and supportive community on their teams and at their school. It's also based on best practices and research in our field of sexual assault prevention. We do recommend that it is used as a complement to other programs that intentionally target or involve men and boys in active prevention efforts. Obviously, I endorse the Coaching Boys into Men program. It would be an issue just to only target girls with this type of information, because we believe that all genders should have an active voice in creating a safe community and preventing violence. So unless maybe you're at an all-girls school or maybe an all-girls athletic organization, it is really best practice to make sure everyone is receiving this type of education. With Athletes as Leaders, we do think of it, or I think of it as a unique approach. If you think about a lot of the traditional messages to women and girls about preventing abuse or preventing assault, it's often a risk reduction approach. What we mean by that, a lot of you who are listening tonight who were maybe raised or socialized as a girl or young woman have heard a lot of these messages, such as don't walk alone at night, always travel with a buddy, always have pepper spray on you, always have your keys in between your fingers ready to stab someone, right? Don't wear your hair in a ponytail because it's easier to grab, right? You get all these messages. And is there really any research that shows that those prevent rape? No. They're not necessarily bad advice, right? You know, I don't think it's bad to teach people safety skills and self-defense, but when you call that sexual assault prevention and domestic violence prevention, it's really putting all the onus on the potential victim. And in this case, putting the onus on women to protect their own assault. So these messages ultimately sometimes send the message that it's the victim's fault. Like if you didn't follow all these rules, like you were partially to blame or had some responsibility. So we really wanted to shift that message and talk about actually how women and girls actually themselves perpetuate some of the issues and how they can help prevent some of the issues. So we really wanted to actually talk uniquely about, you know, some of the more normalized everyday forms of sexual assault and harassment. So what I'm talking about is those that maybe girls are more likely to perpetuate, such as slut shaming, body shaming, the girl on girl hate, especially that you see on social media, but also in person, rumor spreading, victim blaming. Also, girls and young women do play a role in reinforcing harmful gender norms, both for boys and for girls. So we have a unique focus on that. And then lastly, it really encourages the youth to be the leaders. So it's a little less reliant on the coach compared to Coaching Boys into Men. It really empowers the young athletes on girls' teams to create that strong positive culture amongst themselves and create the new norms for their team and their community. So next we're going to watch a video about Athletes as Leaders, and it's a great way to hear from athletes themselves who have gone through the program, one of whom is Elise, who you'll see in the video, and she's actually going to be speaking after me.
Girls can be smart, powerful, awesome, influential, anything.
The term like a girl, I myself have probably used that before, like, oh, you're doing this like a girl, or like be a man, or like man up. It's important to change the connotation that comes along with those phrases.
You still hear that like a girl, you know, and it's not really taught that that's wrong, that girls, what is like a girl? like a girl is awesome because girls are awesome.
The sessions are a great bonding experience for everyone. And we're having just a normal conversation about things that happen, in everyday life and things that are difficult to talk about in other situations, but it makes it a really comfortable space.
It's a program for athletes to talk about gender stereotypes and what they can do to change how people think of women and girls.
We talk about female empowerment when a relationship isn't a healthy relationship and what respect looks like.
Inequalities between men and women and how women have these stereotypes that are being thrown at them and these labels that we kind of have to deal with. You sometimes don't have to really follow them, and you can break out of your stereotype and labels and be who you really want to be.
It's just important to be hearing that in high school, especially when that's like most relevant.
You should always get consent for like everything that you're doing. A lot of times we'll just pat somebody on the back or, just like give them a hug or something. And you can ask consent about that.
It's definitely brought the team together, and it's been able to do that in a way that I don't think any other type of team bonding could do, because it's a deeper level of interacting with each other.
It's a good support group just for girls to talk about what they want to talk about without other people judging them.
It's taught me not to let somebody tell you what you can and what you cannot do because of your gender or who you are.
I think it is important because most people look up to athletes and think that they're a role model that they can follow.
There aren't a lot of programs like this in other schools, and I really think it's important you teach girls about all the stuff that affects them and for them to be able to grow and lead.
1, 2, 3, pull ups!
One of the things that's important to know is that we did receive a lot of feedback from young athletes on girls teams because we did run a lot of focus groups. Both actually Futures Without Violence had done this before we created it, as well as I had gotten a lot of input from local athletes, and they did actually say, many athletes said that they would prefer to have the facilitator of the group be someone who is female identified or non-binary, so basically not their male coach. And so we have kind of handled that on a team by team basis. Some teams have wanted their coach, if their coach was a man, they would want him in the room. And then others, we have gotten really creative with partnering with other mentors. So sometimes the facilitator of this program is the head coach, but sometimes it's the assistant coach. Sometimes it's a volunteer coach. Sometimes it's someone who works at a local domestic violence or sexual assault center. Sometimes it's an amazing intern that you have. Sometimes a college athlete will come back and use this as an internship. So we have gotten really creative. We've had alumni come back. We've had older siblings of athletes facilitate the group. So this is a great opportunity to partner with someone in the community who can be a mentor. It's all about kind of thinking about your team and who might be the best fit. But I'm happy to answer more questions about that in our Q&A section. So I just wanted to tell you what the program sessions are. So this is designed to fit within the sports season, 1 session per week, and they're about 20-minute sessions. They do involve showing a video, and then you get to have this amazing team discussion, which we call the team talk. In the first session, we talk about what the program is, we show the video that you just watched, have them create some group agreements. In the second one, we talk about challenging gender stereotypes about girls and women. In the third session, we encourage athletes to speak out against unfair practices, violence, oppression, and work toward justice and fairness for all people. In session 4, we talk about self-image and standards of beauty, the harmful societal messages that are often aimed at women and girls, and try to redefine beauty and encourage people to look more deeply for who they really are. In the 5th session, we talk about ways that they can help stop sexual rumor spreading specifically, which often unfairly targets women and girls. In the 6th session, we talk about healthy versus unhealthy relationships and warning signs of abuse, also how you can support a survivor or someone who is causing harm. In the 7th session, we talk about consent, and not just in sexual situations, but like all kinds of interactions and just normalizing that in everyday behavior. In the 8th session, we talk about traditional gender stereotypes, particularly about men and boys, and how those can be very harmful, and how girls can play a role in not limiting people by their gender, and encouraging folks to be their true selves. And then session 9 is all about promoting positivity and what it means to be a mentor to younger women and girls. And then lastly, you got to end everything with a party, right? So session 10 is the party, and we do a gratitude circle and wrap up the season. So we were very fortunate to be able to evaluate this program nationally, and we were very lucky to partner with University of Pittsburgh. They were the ones that did the very large studies on coaching boys into men, and they did a preliminary evaluation of our program. And so that was with, I can't actually see that, 268 athletes on 12 teams in 8 states. And we had some really promising results. So the next slide shows the first category was improved ability to identify abusive behaviors. We pulled the athletes at the beginning before they went through athletes as leaders, and then pulled them at the end with a post survey, and found statistically significant improvement in their ability to discern between healthy and unhealthy relationship behaviors. Next, I was very excited to see these results. We had statistically significant improvement in their belief in gender equity and gender equitable attitudes. And then lastly, we had statistically significant improvement in one's self-image and confidence. So for example, feeling confident that they can challenge a certain stereotype or speak up and people will listen to them. And with that said, I think the best way to share the impact of the program is to hear from one of the athletes themselves who went through the program, who now, I think 4 years later after you were in that video, Elise, is that right? Is now in college and is a student athlete in college and has come back to intern with me this summer. And so I want to hand it over to you, Elise, and you can talk a little bit about athletes as leaders and the impact it had on you and your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rebecca. Obviously, athletes as leaders has had a somewhat significant impact on my life. I'm back again and very excited to be here. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit about athletes as leaders and its kind of significance for me, both in my high school experience and as I've been able to go and bring these lessons with me into college. Athletes as leaders was really the first space, I think, for me as a female athlete to be able to talk about some of these issues in the sports world. I think it was really important for me as especially a female soccer player who had very few female coaches. To this day, I think I've been playing soccer for 15 or so years and have had 2 female coaches in my entire career. And so it's hard to bring up these subjects of feeling vulnerable, these emotions that we feel, or just like when things are getting hard and you don't really know why. And it's like working through all of these things that these social norms pile up on many different types of communities, and being able to come into a space with my team, knowing that it was a constructive space that my coach wanted me to be in, where I could speak freely and in vulnerable ways with my teammates about subjects that weren't necessarily encouraged in a competitive setting, was really new to me and felt very empowering. And I talked about this in the video a little bit, but it really brought our team together in ways that high school soccer can be hard to do. There are so many dynamics that are involved. There's you as a soccer player, and then there's you as a student, and that can often mean 2 very different worlds. And in college, it's different because you're spending a lot of time with your team, and the person you are in college and as a student is very much tied to your athletic status as well. But in high school, you don't spend that much time with your team. And so I think there's a lot of power dynamics involved in high school that was hard to understand, that athletes as leaders made it much more tangible. And I could work through these with a lot of my peers that I would not have talked through these things with in normal circumstances. And that made our team a lot stronger, I think, both on a personal level and athletically, as those two are very much linked together. Yeah, it was this like idea of real talk, that like you could go into a space full of competitive athletes and kind of just sit down, relax for a second, like slouch your shoulders and just like really talk about what you went through that day. And it was huge. It was the first time that's happened to me. And those are massive conversations that I have brought forward with me into college as well. So something that is not as relevant in high school, but is something that's very relevant in college, is like drinking culture within the team. And so that's these conversations of how do we create a culture of respect that both includes everyone, doesn't feel like a pressure system, and gives room for everybody to speak their opinion, whether it is different or the same, was also very big. So my freshman year, 2 years ago, oh my gosh, I encouraged the team to have a sit-down conversation with one of our diversity and inclusion persons at our college, and we talked about like all the weird pressures that we feel when it comes to drinking on this team. And like we have a very healthy team culture, and we were still able to have a 3-hour conversation. And so that just shows like how deep all these things really go. And for me, that felt very much like Athletes as Leaders. It was a place where we didn't have our male coach present, and we were able to break down a lot of the bizarre and often just like confusing things that we're all feeling, and yet none of us are acknowledging, and to be able to come together and create a inclusive and constructive community that we all want to be a part of, and we all want to feel respected and like valued in. And that was huge. And we now since have like foundations in place. We have drinking buddies, we have check-in buddies, we have people who will host after party game nights, and like that's the function of the evening. You know, people don't want to get out of the party so we can go play Settlers of Catan together. Like this is all things that for the first time ever have come together because we were just able to step into a vulnerable space together and decide that we were gonna just talk. And I think that's what Athletes as Leaders does, and I'm so grateful that that program was in place when it was for me, because I think it's so pivotal to have that happen in high school, where you're unsure what you're really allowed to talk about and not allowed to talk about, even though people seem to have it figured out. And so for me and for my peers, to step into a space and be like, actually, I don't really know what I'm doing, and that's okay, was huge and totally changed and transformed and made me the person who I am today. So I had a fantastic experience with Athletes as Leaders, and I would recommend it to every every high school athlete. And I would empower coaches to also step into that vulnerable space as well. And like a lot of these topics are not easy to talk about, and they're uncomfortable or quirky and like hard, but that's kind of the whole point. And so I would encourage to step into that discomfort and reap the benefits.
Thank you so much, Elise.
Absolutely.
I want to just share a really quick anecdotal story. So Elise was a rock star, still is a rock star in high school, was team captain. And this was also one of the places that we brought together JVC, JV, and varsity. And that was because the athletes wanted that. And I really saw Elise and several others step up in this leadership role. You think about the power of creating social norms with upperclassmen, really mentoring underclassmen. Also, Elise helped spearhead with her team an awareness campaign where they did purple and teal shoelaces on their soccer cleats. It actually made the local news, and actually we got the football team to do it as well in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. You also did you did amazing things, and so you're being very modest right now, but really it was incredible what you were able to accomplish. And thank you for sharing your story. We want to hear next from Carlos Enriquez, who I would also categorize as a rock star. In Coaching Boys into Men, we use the term coach champion. And I would absolutely call you the coach champion. You took this program on. It took no convincing when I first approached you if you were interested in doing Coaching Boys into Men with your soon to become, at the time, state champion boys soccer team. So we want to hand it over to you and hear what your experience was like implementing the program. How easy was it? How difficult was it? And then what kind of impact did you see on your team?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. You're a rock star too, so we should just form a band someday. Yeah, it was as I was starting the program, I didn't necessarily know what I was really getting into, or I didn't realize how much of an impact it was going to have. As far as implementing it, one of the things that I really appreciate about the program is that it does bring a sense of accountability for coaches. So we mentioned it in some of the slides earlier, but you do have to plan how you're going to have the conversations, when you're going to have it. So for those coaches in the conversation here, you guys know how important it is to know what week one's going to look like, week two, and whether it's our training or the days that we're resting. This really fits right into that, and it really makes you have another level of accountability of when you're going to have this conversation with people. So as far as the planning goes, it definitely helps quite a bit having this 12-week program that you're gonna deliver with your athletes. The biggest benefit though is just it's just an amazing tool to connect with your athletes. As you get going, you not only get to know them better, but you really allow them the space to express themselves a lot more. And I think it's so valuable for young athletes to have that platform to feel comfortable and to be able to share their experiences and learn from each other. And as coaches, we do have an influence, but I absolutely love how as the program rolls out, you see so many athletes step up and take charge of it. And, there is a reason that it's a leadership program. You do begin to see those actions from your athletes. And oftentimes I was amazed at some of the athletes that would step up that I thought were shy or were, not so comfortable, but all of a sudden they had a big role in the conversations that we had, or in mentoring some of the younger players that were on the team. And I saw that from the varsity guys that I was running the program with, but I would constantly hear stories from my JV and my JVC coach of very similar things. So it's definitely something that I think happens all across the board. And, one of the other things that I love, besides it being a tool to connect with your athletes and a way to give your athletes a chance to be leaders, is that it really creates this culture within your program. I think all of us that are running high school programs or any other club, the culture that you have with your team is so important, and this fits right into that. And you're not putting your competitive side or your competitiveness aside or anything. It's really working in line with it. And I know that this isn't the purpose of the program, but I genuinely think that this program makes your team more competitive, because the way that the athletes connect with each other and the way they connect with the coaches, I mean, that absolutely has an influence on how your culture grows and how it strengthens. And the best part about it is that it helps it grow in a positive way, right? So all of a sudden, not only is everyone feeling more comfortable and wanting to work harder for each other, but you're doing that by getting to know each other and to really share each other's humanity. And I think that's just so important and such a powerful tool. And the next big part is that influence now doesn't stop in your program and in your culture. It actually starts extending into the community. So you're influencing you with your staff, you're influencing your connection with your athletes, the connection between the athletes, but then it goes from your program into the school, into the general neighborhood. I mean, it's just a wonderful thing that absolutely comes out of it. And to think that all of that comes out from being able, by just saying, I'm going to plan to have these conversations in there. I'm going to do my homework and get to know the curriculum so that I can feel comfortable doing it. I'm going to connect with people in the community that can help me if I'm having any hiccups through it. And I'm going to do it by just committing to have a 15 to 20 minute conversation a week, that all this incredible things come from that. Right. And I think is in some of the slides that mentioned how important it is, or the influence that we can have as coaches, and really all those little things that you have to do have just an incredible impact, something that we couldn't do alone as coaches. You just see it spread like wildfire. So the way the program's laid out, it's very easy to follow. You can literally read off the cards if you want, or you can find your voice and have some of your assistant coaches take the sessions. And it's just there's so much flexibility, but enough continuity where you can go, all right, this is my guide, and then this is how we're going to make it our own. So it's been an absolutely wonderful program, and I love everything that's come out of it.
That's so great. Thank you. Thanks to you both for joining us for that part too. It's just, it's always nice to, hear about how things can be, but it's really nice to hear about how they actually are. So, and I just love, like, we're seeing all of the stars of the videos. I don't know if we should be keeping track. You should be having a little bingo card for which stars are showing up. So the first question I saw was, let's see, that's a shorter one. Well, first of all, is there a middle school version, and can you do athletes as leaders in middle school? So that's probably for you, Rebecca. Oh, no worries.
Did you say, can you do this program in middle school?
Yeah, there's a specific question about athletes as leaders.
So this is my blanket answer to that question. It was designed for 9th to 12th grade. So I would love to do a middle school adaptation. I would love to do a college adaptation, and I've gotten a lot of requests for that, and we have not done it. I definitely think that most of the content, if not all, is perfectly appropriate for older middle schoolers. But in Washington, we've got 6th graders in middle school, so there's a huge developmental difference between a 6th grader and a 12th grader, and I would adapt the content. So for now, what I say is you're welcome to adapt the program to meet the needs of your community, and happy to discuss further, but I have not had the capacity to even explore a middle school adaptation. So it was definitely designed for 9th to 12th graders in mind.
Great, thanks. And I'll follow up another one with you. Someone asked, are male coaches able to facilitate athletes as leaders for both genders? How would you feel about that?
Great question. So again, there's no really hard requirement on this. We do, if you go to our website, we have a whole, what we call the advocate toolkit. So if you click on the advocate tab at athletesasleaders.org, you will see that there is kind of, I think the document's called like finding the right mentor. And so we have a lot of guidelines on who a good fit might be. We have received, I will say, extensive feedback from young athletes on girls teams that they would prefer a female identified facilitator. And we call this person the mentor. So, or a non-binary person, but basically not, if their coach is a man, usually not, they don't want the male coach. And I would say when I designed the program, I also had that kind of in mind, and it's difficult because most girls teams are coached by men. So it is challenging for implementation. With that said, we are talking about some extremely sensitive topics. We are talking about sexual assault. We are talking about dating violence. We are talking about sexism and internalized sexism, everyday harassment that is happening to them every day. And they're just a higher comfort level, right, is what the athletes have told me. Also with the mentor themselves, right? A lot of the male coaches are like, oh no, I'm good. Like, go ahead and mentor my team. Most of our coaches have welcomed someone to come in and partner with them and facilitate the program. But you also said facilitating this with a boys and a girls team, or a co-ed team?
Well, there was another question in particular that said, is there a version of the program? And I think it can be for coaching boys into men or for athletes as leaders, the question around if you can use it in a co-ed program like track or something like that. So maybe both of you could answer that.
So I get this question a lot. So it's tricky. There's a lot of value to having these conversations conversations in mixed gender settings, right? There's a lot of value in everyone hearing from everybody else how they feel about these topics. With that said, there also is, especially when you're talking about internalized oppression, there's also some value for doing gender specific. These programs were designed to be gender specific. So these programs were designed to use within a high school sports setting, which are gender specific programs. So even a co-ed team like track technically has a boys team and a girls team. And what we would do at Garfield is we would say, you know, female identified athletes are going to do athletes as leaders. Male identified athletes are doing coaching boys and men, and we would implement them at the same time. We have also used athletes as leaders with mixed gender teams, like gymnastics, for example, was majority girls, but there were boys on the team, and non-binary folks too. And we use athletes as leaders. I have also heard in many communities, they have used coaching boys into men with teams that had boys and girls, or I should say all genders on the team. So they were designed to be gender specific, but I know anecdotally they've been used in mixed gender settings too. But that's one of our dreams for the 2.0 or the 3.0 is to have, you know, the next level where everybody comes together and has more really intentional conversations about oppression, intersectionality, and allyship together.
Yeah, so definitely, it's a great question. We get it very often in terms of co-ed spaces, and the curriculum, as I think Rebecca just mentioned, is not designed for that. It actually, at all. It's not designed for cross mixed gender spaces, and there are just so many considerations of how to make sure that that space is comfortable and safe, and what are like the prerequisites? Are there a certain number of conversations that you have to have beforehand? Do you have to have gone through the whole curriculum? There's a number of questions that are there. So, you know, as Rebecca kind of mentioned, we know people have done it. We know people are doing it as, you know, in this present moment. And also we don't have kind of specific guidelines for that at this present moment. I also, just to backtrack upon the piece around middle school, just mentioned coaching boys into men has been evaluated at the middle school level. It's actually the front page of our website right now. Study was released earlier this year, which is really exciting. And we have some additional kind of supplements on bullying, for instance, for middle school age range, as well as, you know, I'll just mention, and this is the case for athletes as leaders and for coaching boys into men, is that we have a huge network of folks who have implemented in a variety of contexts. And the University of Pittsburgh, who helped out with our middle school evaluation, you know, they would be more than happy to talk with anyone here about, you know, some of those nitty-gritty questions that you might have. How do we adapt for a middle school context? How do we talk? So anyways, if you have any questions that are more targeted, please, you know, make sure to get in touch with us.
Okay, great. Do you want to go ahead and address the other question that you sort of started to address in the chat, Jesse, too, about club sports?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the answer is pretty quick, which is yes. I mean, it can be implemented in school sports environments, club environments. It is, you know, so long as the environment is one in which, you know, athletes feel together as a team, you know, and they can really share their experiences. They can be vulnerable with each other. So long as the coach is committed to the principles of the program. You know, I myself, I haven't played in some certain club environments in which there might be a different kind of attitude, but I don't think that's the case. I think that there generally is, as Brian said much earlier on, the spirit of coaching boys into men and athletes as leaders to bring a group of people together actually can strengthen a team in terms of even the competitive elements and the team elements and the, you know, the winning elements too. So
great. Okay, thanks. I want to go just a little bit big picture because this was a question that came up at the beginning of the training, so I want to make sure we get to it, which is, what do you do when a player is accused of abuse? So if you have any experience with that or just some guiding principles.
So I'll say, what I can say, and of course my colleagues jump in, is that what we hear typically is that not even so much that there is someone on the team using violence and coming forward, even though certainly that will happen. They know of a friend who might be in an abusive relationship, but by and large, what we also hear is what's happening at home. And so because we're talking about these issues, the coach will then be a safe place for someone on the team to essentially disclose. Now, that causes a complication when we think about mandatory reporting. And so then what we also talk about in the training as well is a disclosure is not necessarily a report. In fact, a disclosure is not a report, right? We know that. And so being sure and how to navigate that conversation of when you need to share with the athlete that what they're going to then share with you and talk to you about is if they are in danger, you need to let them know what your then responsibilities are. Legally, but also too, right? Like we're caring about the health and safety and wellness of kids. The most important piece here as well is to think about, we need to partner with our advocate, right? Coaches are not social workers, and they don't work with Eileen, at Riskative, right? So, and that's okay, right? The coach is central to delivering the education, and it really is a partnership. I'll stop there. You guys can talk more about it specifically in your community if there's anything else you want to share, but that interplay is what's so important because all just scenarios could be different.
Thanks. And just to add one thing to that is, I think it's important to know what kind of lane CBIM in particular falls into. And athletes as leaders, which is really, is like prevention. It's prevention before abuse has occurred, and to intervene when it does occur, as opposed to when harm has happened. It's not a program that is for reconciliation or restoration. But with that said, I think it creates the context for that to happen. If coaches and athletes have been having these conversations, it creates a space that I think is less judgmental, but it's still accountable in the context of when abuse and harm happen. But it's a really, I think, a challenging thing because oftentimes allegations of abuse, whether or not it be sexual assault or otherwise, are often highly, highly public, and highly public in a whole town, for instance, or a whole city. And so it's a really challenging question. And yeah, I'm curious if there are others who have thoughts about kind of specific ways to respond beyond what I shared.
I guess for me, I would just to offer that I think that it's a really important question to think about going in, because I think that you're all just so right around that what these programs do is create this culture of talking about things, which is always good. And when we talk about things, we find out things. And so I feel like there's this beauty in having this come to light, which is the really hard truth for many of us, which is that people we love and care about cause harm. And so by doing these kinds of programs, we're lifting that up, but then also saying, we're going to take care of each other, not just the person who was harmed, which I hope we do, but we're not going to throw away the person that did the harm. And that these kind of programs, I think, can change our communities to actually really respond in new ways than we haven't had practice, So I just love the idea of like lifting it up as a thing, right? Once we know it's a thing, then we can actually do something about it. So I think it's so wise to even just before you start doing this, to just think about like, what would that look like? And how would I get support for the person who was harmed? And how would I get support for the person who did it? So thanks for raising that question.
I think it's also important to think about it like there are layers to that response, right? So there's the relationship involved, and then the people around them, and then the community around them.
Right.
Every level requires a different kind of response. And what's most important on that inner circle is that there be some kind of, hopefully some professional or, supportive advocacy guidance that would be talking about what is it that the most impacted people need, what the person that harm was caused to and the person that caused harm. So often the approach is, how do we keep this out of the limelight? How do we protect our community, which is a totally normal and natural response. However, when that kicks accountability to the sideline, then you actually shortcut the process of restoring that individual to the community. Accountability is the mechanism to restoring the person to the community. So it's not either or, and we immediately go into this kind of dualistic thinking of it's this way or that way, or I either side with this person or that. It's a community response that says, what is the best way that we can respond for everybody involved? Not just one dualistic purpose, right? So it's critical to get support in this and have what we started this conversation with was connection, right? Like having connection with other people is a great segue back to the initiating thought.
Yeah, I think I might take this opportunity to shift back just to there's so many questions still to be answered that are written and otherwise, right? But I think that it's a nice segue to, you know, really what I wanted to close with, which is that connection to domestic and sexual violence advocates. Because I think that the stronger your partnerships are with your local programs and as advocates with the coaches and as athletic directors with the domestic and sexual violence programs, like all of that goes better. So like I said earlier, you all will be getting a copy of this PowerPoint, and all of these links are live. So I want to offer that you can stay connected in lots of ways. And Jesse, actually, I'll let you talk through this. This will be a hyperlink to this actual page on the website, but if you just want to share what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see that map is a little outdated right now, but the register link, I know it works. I've just tested it. And if you register there, you'll just make sure to get all the updates, you know, you'll get all the updates, virtual implementation stuff, connections to other coaches, to other advocates, to the monthly trainings we have going on. So, you know, please get connected to us. And however we can help, you can find our email through the website. You can also just email Coaches Corner at futureswithoutviolence.org. And once again, thank you.
Great. So I just want to take this time, you know, we spent 2 hours together in the midst of a pandemic, and I know you have many things to do. School is starting soon. Who knows what day it is? What is time anyway? But we really appreciate that you spent the 2 hours with us, and I just appreciate all that you're doing to show up for your community in these really challenging times. I also just want to thank all of the panelists and just for all the work. You know, Team Up Washington is a partnership. We could not do this without all of you, and certainly it wouldn't even be a thing, right, without especially Rebecca and Ward. So I just want to really appreciate all of you, and the fact that we got Jesse and Brian from the Bay Area to come up here. The weather is clearer, or the air is clearer. I wish you could be in our air here. But we just so appreciate you spending the time with us, and to be able to have Elise and Carlos to share your great experiences has been really just so impactful.